Thank you everyone for joining us today for the last installment of the 2015 Sustainability Leadership Presentation Series. The series is a partnership between Joslyn Institute for Sustainable Communities, Central Community College, Metropolitan Community College, and Waste Cap, Nebraska. The series is Waste Cap, Nebraska. It's a monthly presentation series on topics relating to sustainability, energy, and the environment. Presenting today is Cecil Steward, a world expert on sustainable development and sustainable design. Dean Emeritus and Emeritus Professor of Architecture and Planning at the University of Nebraska College of Architecture in Lincoln, Cecil is President and founder of the Joslyn Institute for Sustainable Communities. A past president of the National American Institute of Architects, Steward has served on the board of the Associates of Collegiate Schools of Architecture and on the charter board of the Architectural Research Centers Consortium. He serves on the board of directors of the Asia Pacific Center for Architecture, the National Design Futures Council, and the steering committee of the United Nations Center for Human Settlements Best Practices Network and its International Dubai Award for Best Practices in Sustainable Development, among others. In public service, he is a former member of the board of directors of the Downtown Lincoln Association, the Lincoln Lancaster Planning Commission, and the Lincoln Children's Museum Board of Directors. In 2005, he started the Nebraska Center for Sustainable Construction, which operates a recycled building materials store in Lincoln, Nebraska. He is a member of the Nebraska Capital Environs Commission, where he assisted in writing the first design guidelines for urban protection of the Nebraska Capitol building. At the national level, he has served on the National Peer Review Committee for design reviews of selected General Service Administration projects, including buildings with the U.S. Capitol Complex, and as a member of the Pennsylvania Avenue Design Charrette team in Washington, D.C. At the international level, Cecil has served as a member of the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations and the UNESCO-sponsored Design Charrette team for the International Memorial to West African Slave Trade in Dakar, Senegal. Since 1984, he has served as a consultant to the People's Republic of China in establishing accreditation and licensing for architects. He is serving as an advisor to the World Olympiad for Urban Design and is involved in more groups working to promote sustainable development in urban areas throughout the world. Cecil's presentation is entitled The Quest for Quality Nebraska Places.
Thank you.
I don't know.
There we go. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Katie, and good afternoon. Very happy to be with all of you, both here in Omaha and around the state. Conservation and the quest for quality Nebraska places. This is really what the Joslyn Institute was formed to do 19 years ago. We formed the Joslyn Institute at the time I was still Dean of Architecture at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, and our primary mission was created to bring more information to the public and to students, especially students in planning and architecture at that particular time. Our activities and our operational characteristics are seeking grants and contracts to do case study work on specific places. And by places, I mean a single building, a group of buildings, a neighborhood, a commercial enterprise, an entire city, and entire regions. We have developed some tools that I'm going to describe to you today to allow assessment of places as you find them and to determine whether or not in the future implementing some of those recommendations that comes out of the use of the tools, that you might find this place becoming more sustainable. We all know that we're caught up in the midst in our communities and where we live in change that we did not create. There are drivers of change surrounding us. Population growth, for one. Urbanization, megacities, which we've never had in the history of the earth. Rural-urban migration, people moving from rural settings to urban settings. Technologies and change in work patterns. Just today there was an article in the Lincoln paper about 9 to 5 is more or less disappearing in many locations. People are working from home. People are taking individual contracts for services and working part-time or shorter hours, different circumstances. That is changing. Climate change. That argument continues to go on. Many say it's time that the argument is over, that it is changing, and we should perhaps stop trying to point fingers as to who is responsible, but accept the fact that our climate is changing and changing more drastically than any of us have realized in the past. Another driver of change is the diminishing natural resources, the non-renewable resources that we all depend upon for our work and lifestyles. And then under the social characteristics, dramatic changes in spiritual and secular ideologies around the world are impacting many of us in very direct ways. Especially focusing on natural resources. We felt a couple of years ago at the Institute that in Nebraska in particular, there are 5 key resources: land, water, energy, materials, and food. And these resources are critical and vital to our future as Nebraska residents. And as a matter of fact, there's probably no other state in the Union that has access to such abundant resources in at least 4 of these 5 areas, that 5th one being materials. It would be the case that while materials are abundant surrounding us, they're not necessarily native to our locale. But we have tremendous energy opportunities in both sun, solar, and wind, and we have the 2nd largest water aquifer in the world beneath the feet of most of us who live in Nebraska. So conservation becomes an issue and a question. Do we have a special trust because of this abundance, or do we have a right to simply harvest and use these resources until they are diminished beyond their capacities? Because these questions are vital to the future of our families and our children and their children, we felt it was important to open the conversation around the state. We put on 4 conferences in 4 different locations a year and a half ago, and we call these conversation conferences. We organized them in such a way that we didn't invite talking heads as speakers, as you're suffering through at the moment. We asked people to come and talk to each other. And at these 4 conferences, we were able to film the conferences, and then we put together a video, a 1-hour video that we titled Nexus, the connection between resources, conservation, and development. I'm going to show you 2 particular clips this afternoon from that Nexus presentation, which I think provide a good setting for the conversation that we will have in this next hour and a half. So let me proceed to the first video clip. This would be the introduction to that video. Okay, good. Well, from this introduction ending up with a suggestion that our questions should perhaps be addressed through the 5 domains. And to repeat those, that's environment, technologies, social cultural conditions, public policy, and economics. Well, Freudian slip, but I would leave economics last, wouldn't it? We were asked in 2005 by the planning department of the city of Omaha if we'd be interested in performing an assessment study of the impact on growth from environmental consequences in a reasonable distance of the city of Omaha. So we arbitrarily selected 60-mile radius. That just includes Lincoln. It includes 3 counties in Iowa and 13 counties in Nebraska. And many of us, I think, don't realize that we live, those of us within this 60-mile radius, live in one of the most fragile ecosystems in the entire Midwest. This is a confluence of 2 major rivers. And every river has watersheds that feed it. So it's not just the rivers themselves that we should be concerned about. It's all the watershed structure within this 60-mile radius that feeds the rivers. And when we get rains like we've had just now in May and June, we become very cognizant of the flow of water and groundwater and the damage that can be done. When it's high and dry, we don't think too much about it. So we took this study on and spent a year assessing what are the consequences of growth within the 60-mile radius. There's about 1.2 million people currently living within that 60 miles. It's projected that in 2050, it very likely will be at least double that population. Where will we build? What will the development patterns be? Will the development patterns recognize the floodplains and the characteristics of living amidst the confluence of these 2 rivers? What we quickly realized in performing this study was sustainability at that point from about 1980 to 2005 had been defined mostly through language growing out of the United Nations that said to all of us that economics, environment issues, and social cultural issues should be considered at the same time, and a lot of attention to the interactive connections between those 3 domains. Well, as we analysis and recommendations in this study, we realized that, wait a minute, there are 2 other key characteristics if we're trying to predict the sustainability of this region. One of those characteristics is technologies. At the rapid pace of development of technologies and at the expense of technologies, we need to be able to organize these domains along with the 3 originally noted through UN studies. So technologies and public policy. We could satisfy all of the 3 original, and yet if we don't have government regulations and government ordinances and government guidance on public policy that fit the sustainable characteristics of what we're trying to accomplish, we very likely will not arrive at a sustainable condition. So this was the genesis, and that was the study that allowed our institute to develop, if you will, a mantra that whether we're looking at a single building or we're looking at a community or we're looking at a neighborhood, if we analyze through these 5 domains, and organized recommendations and principles, we will have paid attention to the interdependencies and interconnections between them. We had tested that process with this study by organizing focus groups and what architects call charrettes. We actually had design recommendations come out of these group settings, and we paid careful attention to the invitees, stakeholders, people who own property, people who own businesses, people who were held government positions, organized in such a way that they interacted with each other. But each group had a facilitator who was guiding the group through these 5 domain considerations. Out of the realization that there is a methodology to sustainability, we started asking ourselves, can we measure the characteristics at any given point in time? So the character of time and the characteristic of measurable, quantifiable notions of progress or of decline would be important to the analysis process. Sustainometrics is a coined word that we gave to this procedure, and we've organized this in a written publication under the title Sustainometrics. We have with us here in the Omaha audience today some books to let you see the characteristic of guiding one through this process. But briefly, you could define key measurable points in each of those 5 domains represented by these 5 pie-shaped conditions, and the different colored circles represent characteristics of time from near-term, medium-term, long-term. This could be arranged over, let's say, a 3-year, 6-year, 9-year pattern, or any definition of time you'd like to give it. You could organize the severity or the importance of each of those measurable elements within the 5 domains to give yourself and a viewer a notion of, if you change one of those, it changes everything in the circle. They are all interrelated, and it has been organized into a software principle so that you could go through a what-if exercise and say, well, if the legislature didn't give us the funding, then it affects the social cultural condition of the outcome. Or if the social cultural condition requires more resources, then what is the magnitude of those resources? It's a mechanical process. This reminds me that we are going to have a Q&A period at the end of the presentation, and if you have questions, please make note. The audience is outstate. We'll be taking notices written and sent in, and we'll deal with those at the end of the presentation, if you would please. So it's a fairly simple process in training and organizing and communicating, and we have spent some time with government leaders at different cities and different county levels and this legislature, asking them to take this methodology under consideration. By way of demonstrating how this can work in scales, another project shortly after the regional assessment one, we were asked here in Omaha to do an assessment of some buildings that were built in the 1920s. You may be familiar with the Drake Court Apartments in Midtown Omaha. I think there are 14 of those apartment buildings. The Nebraska Investment Finance Authority wanted to put money into those buildings to provide additional low-income housing and mixed market housing for people that wanted to be in the heart of Omaha. But that was a neighborhood at the time that was in stress. Stress from a social economic set of conditions and stress economically. Businesses were moving out, and they were saying, we're not going to throw money at this project if we cannot see a future of stability in the area. So they asked us to apply this methodology and give them recommendations. Is there a way that certain improvements could be made that would make those apartments quality of life, living circumstances for mixed income people? And we were able to show, given certain circumstances and conditions of economics and social and environmental circumstance, that it could be a very vital neighborhood. One of the immediate results of the study was the building of Omaha's first elementary school in downtown Omaha in about 50 years. And so that became a stabilizing factor for the neighborhood. And both entities were convinced that, yes, this is a place for new investment. Yes, this is a place where sustainability could happen. Here are some of the recommendations that we developed. Each of these, and bear in mind that each one of these recommendations in each of the 5 domains is intended to be measurable. You can apply numbers to this. Increase green and public open spaces. Increase green streetscapes. You could count the trees. You could count the number of green spaces that would exist against those that don't exist at the moment. So this becomes a quantifiable characteristic of sustainometrics. These are available on our website for more detailed inquiry and study. I won't go through these in a reading sort of way, but under public policies, for instance, the Omaha Planning Board and City Council incorporate a sub-area plan for the district. This area had been avoided for planning purposes for many years. We're simply saying, if there's new planning, new ideas brought to the table, this will be an important area of the public policy action. Develop an overlay plan for the district to be designated a green by design district, meaning that there's more walkability, there's more biking, and there's more safety, there's more landscaping. All of those things can be quantified under a recommendation. Moving to some international impact of some of our work. You may be familiar that in the late 1980s, Medellin, Colombia was known as the murder capital of the world. It was a hotbed of drug cartel action, and people were leaving more quickly than they were migrating into this beautiful city. And it truly is a beautiful place. Other than Hawaii, I've never been to an environment that was more temperate, more lush in green natural landscape, and the setting for that city is just phenomenal. But it had become a mecca controlled by the crime cartels. This gives you a sense of the location, northern part of South America. This was clippings and photographs from trouble in the 1980s. It was reported that there were as many as 1,500 people per day being murdered in this city over drugs. The gentleman in this photograph to the right was the kingpin. There finally was a final resolution to his life. Some young reformists took over the government, and this place in about 10 to 15 years totally turned itself around. And it turned itself around on the physical environment. There were architects and planners involved You can see the setting of the city. It's surrounded by mountain ranges, and it sits in a valley. Well, the rich lived at the lower levels of the valley, and the poor had to migrate up the mountainside. There was no transportation. People couldn't get to and from work, and in general, it was just gridlocked in terms of social and civic activity. The new government put in ski lifts from the lower valley to the top of the mountain to get people up and down cheaply. And along the ski lift routes, they built what they called libraries, but they really were child daycare centers. And people suddenly could move throughout the city. They could have their children taken care of, and they could seek employment anywhere in the valley. They closed some of the streets. They made marketplaces out of many of the downtown valley streets. They incorporated public transit and built public use facilities at the terminal stations. This is what would otherwise be referred to as transit-oriented development, where you were getting more good from just good transit out of the development at the station stops. These were some of the libraries that were built along the ski lift characteristics. I met one of the chief architects of this revitalization plan through our work in the United Nations. They invited us to come down and give a workshop with the city planners on our methodology because they wanted to spread this economic development and this revitalization throughout the whole valley and turn Medellin into a regional commercial force. This is a botanical garden, a public place that was built as a part of the recovery system. So we spent 2.5 days in a workshop setting with 15 of their urban planners, going through the questions of in 5, 10, and 15 years, those outer rings being a 15-year time frame, what do you hope to achieve in 15 years for the region? And gave a score or a evaluation timescale to measurement of each of those sustainability indicators. They have implemented some of this. They're on their way to completing some of it. And in general, the reformation continues through sustainable principles. Another international use of the tool was in Inner Mongolia. Inner Mongolia is a province of China and the northern edge between Russia and China. The problem here was a 400 square mile wetland, the largest single wetland in the world, fed by a single river, was being intruded upon by regional urban growth. And that growth is being fed by surface coal. You could walk along the surface and drag a foot, and under your footprint would be surface coal. And it's so abundant that the entire region is becoming polluted and just a sink pit of carbon. The mayor of the major city in the region wanted an assessment of what can we do who live there to turn this situation around and protect the wetland. The UN organized 21 so-called experts ranging from wetlands, hydrologists, geologists, climatologists, people who had knowledge of behavior of natural systems to come and spend a week working with the locals to identify the key questions. And we were able to advise them to organize the questions according to the 5 domains. And this proved to be a very efficient process in a short period of time. And the panel was able to leave the locals with a set of recommendations that hopefully over time can protect this environment. Just to give you a view of some very unusual landscape, this is the Ogallala River that feeds 400 square miles in summertime. Beautiful setting. In the fall, it becomes a different landscape. And in the spring, it becomes another beautiful landscape. Tourism was a major opportunity for this region because it's the world doesn't know about it, basically. But therein lies some other potential damaging circumstances when you invite a lot of people tramping around in a wetland. You want to be very careful about where they can be and what their limits are. We were invited in the winter, and it was 20 below zero. But that in and of itself had its own beauty, and it gave us a very dramatic snapshot of what the liabilities and the threats really were. They raise sheep. Horses run free range, and they continue to have the reputation of terrific horsemen in that region of the world. And originally, there wouldn't be permanent housing. They would have lived in yurts that were very portable and very nomadic lifestyle for the people who lived on the land. But this is a very small village, and you can see the carbon pollution just from a small place. That's the kind of carbon atmosphere you would expect over a large city. But they burn the surface coal to heat their homes. They burn it to cook with, and any industry that's there is also burning it. So it's a very climatic threat to the whole region. Here you can see that they just, like dirt piles, that's coal that's piled up in front of the housing so that they just step out the front door and use it all during winter and then replenish it later in the better weather. They're very proud people. They have long tradition and a lot of traditions of costume and performance, and they love to sing. They put on great performances for these visitors there, and we enjoyed it. Their cities are Russian influenced mostly from architecture, but this particular region proved that education is the key to sustainable development. The mayor had organized educational programs, and of course in Chinese culture, if the top figure mandates it, it will be done. It's a very dictatorial culture. But he mandated that there would be sustainability education in every classroom, in every level of the public school system. And almost overnight, the entire city, small as it was, this Ogallala was probably 50,000 people, but every person there knew what sustainability was, what it meant, what they were trying to do, and what the purpose of saving the wetlands would be. So it was very effective. I'm going to show you another clip from the video, and this one is going to focus on food. We We believe that food ties all of these other domains together, and that it is the epitome of the characteristic of working through the environmental assessment and the eco-step process. So let's take a look. This is about a 14-minute clip, and we'll have a Q&A period at the end of this. The last project example I want to show you is a food systems study. Resulting from these conversations, it's very apparent that if communities are interested in local food systems, it's not just as simple as putting up a farmer's market on the weekend. As one of the panelists mentioned, that all of the farmers out there are traditional individuals, especially in local food production. Many of the farmers on commodity crops are members of co-ops. The co-op formation hasn't really hit the local food farmer. What is emerging is something called food hubs, which is another organizational characterization of cooperative marketing, cooperative distribution, and trying to take advantage of the volume creation through cooperation. We have been asked in Lincoln, and we've expanded this study to Lincoln and Omaha, because we learned recently that a developer in Omaha currently is studying a building in the old market area for a 12-month farmers market. And we have an idea in Lincoln that if you're at all familiar with Lincoln's building stock, you know that we've recently built a brand new arena, and it now causes the Pershing Auditorium in Lincoln to be surplus property. No one has come forward yet with a viable idea to save that building. There's a lot of competitors for the building site, but there's about 400 tons of material that would be involved in destruction of that building just to clear the site. So what we have engaged in is a study of a regional food hub that would supply and support a local 12-month public market. And this is the current building in question. It was built about 57 years ago and built as sound as a fortress. It is a building in very good shape, but it has a very specific design for specific purposes, and that was performances in auditoria type seating. Our suggestion is to turn this into a public market on Centennial Mall with mixed uses, housing, restaurants, public market, a district energy system that supplies energy not only to this building but to other adjacent buildings that are yet to be designed, and give a new face on the refurbished Centennial Mall leading up to the Capitol for the front entrance of the building. We're suggesting turning the roof mostly into skylights so that it feels like an open-air market. And at the same time, it presents an opportunity to develop an indoor greenhouse through access to all of that natural light, which would mean that some of the produce being sold on the floor is being produced right within the building. We're also suggesting, and there is a photograph of the greenhouse on the left, we would leave the theater-style seating, the tiered seating, take the seats out and put in plant beds where the seats were, and that becomes a productive greenhouse. The big gray square at the end of the east end of the arena floor would be an electronic community information center, so that if you're shopping, you get all the current events going on in the community right in front of you as you're doing your shopping. This passageway to the right is access to housing on the south facade of the building, and a similar one would be created on the north side, and these would be artist-style production, live workspace style housing. My daughter is an artist in LA, and she says, gee, how nice would it be to have your market under your bedroom for your art products? And so the market would be arts and crafts as well as food, especially in off-season growing season situations. This is a cutaway. There's a basement that would house about 200 cars, and the housing is left and right. Sorry. Okay, but this demonstrates the market and the arrangements that would have to be designed around the public market. We've also, back up to the food hub. All right. Thank you. Sorry. And next slide. This is a view on Centennial Mall with a new glass enclosure for the mosaic mural that is the front piece of the building. There's been quite a controversy in Lincoln over the potential destruction of that piece of art, and there's a lot of history behind that artwork. Lincoln Civic Center is really the Capital Environs District. Architect Bertram Goodhue, who designed the State Capitol building, gave us a axis, north, south, and east and west, rather than a square block for the creation of Civic Center. So it's a more strict relationship. This is the relationship suggestion of the hub and the market, and the food hub would have to have specific producers, public market coordination, processing center, distribution center, and so forth. I'm going to stop here because this is a project that's currently underway. We're about 2 weeks away from a final report on the feasibility of the food hub and the public market. Just to leave you with a final thought, sustainability is really conservation design and planning. It's community by community, place by place, and person by person. Until and unless we as individuals, in our consumption habits, in our living habits, in our communities, fully embrace the idea of conservation, we really will be a long way from sustainable living and sustainable communities. Thank you very much for your attention today. We will take questions. I'll have to repeat the questions. If you here in Omaha have a question, just speak up. I'll repeat the question. Otherwise, some of the questions outside are coming into us over the audio system. So we'll spend a few minutes now in that mode.
We have a minute.
Yes.
My understanding is that in terms of infrastructure, whether it's electrical grid, banking, people alternative co-op banking, there's a big massive investments in public resources. And I found that generally people have a lot of information when they go to buy a computer or a refrigerator, or what do they want out of it, what's the relative cost of money. They know next to nothing about their tax and so forth. They're sure they pay too much, but they don't know what they're getting, how much they're getting. Whether you've looked or anyone who's looking to try and make that information publicly easily available in some sense of for every dollar I spend, 2 cents goes.
Right. Well, for those outstate, the question here in Omaha is, are there ways to discern what our public funding is actually supporting and where we can get information on major development issues of public funds? This is an excellent question. It bores right to the heart of the fact that anything we try to do economically must have consideration of the social consequences and the environmental consequences and the impact of technologies with the funding. It's watchfulness on all of our parts of our elected officials. It's being not so passive about things in the public domain until they're already decided. It's taking part in the process, and that depends upon a higher degree of education about what these relationships are in the planning process. So it's very complicated in terms of actually knowing. I mean, let's back up on food, for instance. We don't get enough information off the shelf of the imported food, of where it came from, how it was grown, what it costs, as compared to what it might cost if we were producing it locally. So it's active engagement, and it's good education, and it's the display of public information. And if we can influence those three things, I think you would have the kind of information you're looking for. One in the back, and you're next.
Well, would you comment on 2 things? One is when you showed the project decision wheel, you had some items that were on the outer rim of the wheel. And would you comment on how you determined where on that wheel it would be? Did it have to meet a threshold of being absolutely renewable to be on the outer rim of the wheel, or more renewable? How did you decide how far out to place that? That was one question. And then the second question I have is, did you evaluate or have you considered doing an economic value to externalities for projects?
Okay.
That the market economy would help to.
Let me repeat your question. The Omaha question has 2 parts. One is on the wheel of decision making for sustainometrics that was exhibited in my presentation. What determines what ends up on the outer ring of the wheel? And secondly, do we consider in this process an economic evaluation of externalities in the other domains? First answer to your first part of the question, the outer ring is a time ring. The closer to the center is closer to the present. So there were 3 divisions, near term, middle term, and long term. The score, however, the number in parenthesis adjacent to the dot on the timeline, is determined by a typology underlying the concept. I didn't show that typology because it's what I refer to as deepening subjectivity. It becomes more objective the deeper you move into an evaluation process and move into a scale of numbers. So I guess my best answer to you at the moment is I'd like you to buy the book. and it's fully described and explained in the material we've displayed. The numbers in our use of the measurement system range from 1 to 10 in value. And there's an awful lot of subjective judgment about the number you would assign. But you can defend those on the aggregate, and you can question them on the individual metric scale over time. The object is, as time moves on, the numbers get larger. That would be your planning principle of the use of the measurement characteristics. I didn't do very good at answering that question, but I believe that's the best I can do at the moment.
It's good to go one from online, so we can go back and forth.
Okay.
If there's a chance.
Are there questions online?
Cecil, we've had a few come in. Thanks for
I have
asking
questions that
here.
have come in.
Yeah, hey, let me read them to you here. Can you hear me okay?
You talk local food production and all that. How do you know it's local? For instance, people, they sell them at farmer's market and all that.
Mm.
How do you know that the guy is really a local farmer or anything, or did he go down to the grocery store and expect to double the price and sell it?
Well, you have to have a certain degree of trust and faith. However, one of our objectives in defining the food hub in Nebraska, we have an inventory of 600 local farmers, and we know what they produce on an annual basis. So it is a matter of trust that it comes from their farm to the market. But we also have a distributor who picks that food up on site, knows what is being delivered on the farm site, and knows what they bring to the market.
Yeah.
So, I mean, basically, it's...
But don't you potentially have a lot of, should we say, residential customers that say, hey, I grew this in my garden, and you don't know if they dumped a whole bunch of poison on it or grew it organically or what?
Well, we also know if they're certified, which, has a set of standards. And, but you will know more about how that food was grown in Nebraska than you will know how it got to the shelf in the supermarket.
Or the farmer's market or whatever.
Right. Right. Because there's more local people directly involved. And the food hub would be operated by a set of people who are invested in the local food system. They would so set certain standards and regulations.
So you're not having people going down there and say, I got a nice garden. Man, my tomatoes did great this year, and I can't eat all of them, so I'll take them down to the farmer's market and sell them.
Mm-hmm. Well,
does that happen?
Local gardens?
Sure.
Sure. They're welcome. They're a vital part of the...
But you don't know whether I grew it organically or I dumped a ton of poison on them to keep the bugs off.
I think that's the point. Farmers market sell excess produce and don't label if it's organic or it's not. So much people have to pay to have a booth at the farmers market.
We're going to take another question online, and are trying to get a question online again, and we'll pick up the conversation at this location after the...
Okay, can you guys hear me okay this time?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know what happened last time. Sorry about that. So we do have a few questions that have come in. One is, I'm going to read you two of them at once and also remind any other viewers, if you're watching, to put it in the chat box or tweet it or let your local extended learning service rep or whoever's in the room staffing your event know your questions, and we'll get them to Cecil. So Cecil, the two that I'd like you to answer next are, can you please explain the bike condo concept? And another question was, the first eco-step diagram shown, was that from the Omaha area?
Okay, I'll answer the second question first, and the answer is yes. That was from the Omaha area. The bike condo as a use within the proposed Pershing auditorium structure, Lincoln is developing a divided permanent bike lane that borders the property where the Pershing auditorium sits. And so we expect there will be more commuter bikers in downtown Lincoln and not just recreational biking. This presents a need for an opportunity for a person to be able to safely store their bike and perhaps have some repair work done on it while it's in storage during the day, and have shower facilities and be able to change clothes on inclement weather days. So we are dedicating some space in the Pershing for bike lockers, shower room, repair station, and facilitating the use of the bike as a transit alternative. Another question?
Okay, thank you very much. I haven't had any other ones come in, so if you want to continue to take ones in the room, folks, please tweet them or put them in the chat box. We'll be wrapping up very shortly.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions. I often, when I'm thinking about sustainability, I work on a couple of organic farms, and when I think about the future of sustainability, I often wonder if the entire structure of others' eating habits is completely at question, because I eat completely differently. And I drive around and I'm like, there's 1,000 restaurants in Nebraska. None of them serve food. I mean, none of it's food. You go to the grocery store, none of that's food. Mm-hmm. And like you said, when it's 11 cents per dollar, or that's going to farmers, you wrap that up if people weren't eating processed food. So, I mean, have you guys tried to calculate? And I've also noticed that that's, I mean, part of the, I think, socioeconomic and public policy is kind of trying to just change people's minds about how they're eating in general. And then the second question was, you talked about, in discussing his matter, you talked about people actually coming to the farms and distributing. I'm completely ignorant to the idea of a local food. Like, are you saying that there's actually something in process that is distributing and collecting for the farmers? Because the farmers I work for, that's a very hard thing to do, and I often try to help them out with that.
Right. I'm going to repeat your questions, and I'm going to take the second one first. The question relates to what facilitates distribution from the farm to the market, and whether there's an organized process here in this study to accomplish that. And then the first question was whether or not it's going to require us all to change our eating habits in order to be sustainable and in order to support local farming. Is that fair?
Yeah.
As far as the distribution system, we have something in Nebraska that's a private enterprise called Nebraska Co-op Farms. And they basically are distributors. They're not produce raisers. They operate at a fairly low scale. But we have had extensive discussions with this organization for the likelihood of there being the heart of a major distribution system that would at least serve within 150 miles of Omaha and Lincoln. And there are about 300 farms in the inventory within that radius. They would pick up from those individual farms and bring the produce to the market. There would be a distribution center.
So currently that's not happening?
It doesn't exist. Well, it exists on a small scale, okay, and only in the summertime, and only for the summer farmer market. It's a embryonic organization that we can build upon and work around. As far as changing our eating habits, I think our eating habits are changing, and certainly in the larger cities more rapidly than in Nebraska. But we are planning 3 restaurants that would be compelled to serve only from local foods inside the market to give people in Lincoln a direct choice. There are probably 5 or 6 restaurants that serve local food when they can get it. And this is part of the problem with the restaurant services. They can't depend upon steady volume of local produce across 12 months in order to advertise that they are serving from local food. Right, right. So it's changing. Both of those circumstances that you inquire about are changing, and we think it's a trend.
You could probably talk local during the summer, but what are you going to do in the winter?
Well, you're going to have a processing center that processes foods that does canning, that grows produce in greenhouses, that extends the growing season. I think there are a number of steps to extend the season that can be taken that we haven't really experimented with yet. And the indoor greenhouse is another strategy for that.
If you start talking indoor greenhouses, you're starting to talk artificial and all that stuff too.
Well, not really. There are new technologies already advancing for growing fresh produce in high-rise structure. If you've got the right circumstances and the right climatic orientation and so forth. There's also aquaponics, where you can grow fish and vegetables in the same container. So there's new ways to get more food than we've thought of in the past. Any other questions in Omaha? Any other questions outstate?
Looks like you have satisfied them, Cecil. Thank you so much.
Or else put them to sleep. Well, thank you all very much for your attention and for your presence, and we very much appreciate being a part of this series, and we hope to continue this next season, next year. Thank you.
I just have a few closing remarks for everyone. A couple things. One, we always report our viewership numbers, and we never have the full numbers. But we have at least 65 viewers that have reported in from across 7, 8, 9, 10 sites across Nebraska. That's wonderful. We also put the videos up on YouTube, so you'll be able to check it out there. Please check back in with Central Community College, Joslyn Institute for Sustainable Communities, Metropolitan Community College, and Waste Cap, Nebraska this fall when the SLPS continues. We will be on a break for the summer, and we look forward to seeing everyone back watching us and learning about sustainable practices this fall. Thanks, everyone. Have a great Thursday.